Shio, welcome to the Red Road East. I am your host, Fierce Truth Seeker. The Red Road East is an indigenous TV program dedicated to archiving and preserving the history, legacy, and culture of the original peoples of the Americas east of the Mississippi River and the Caribbean. So, today's show, we're going to be doing part three of the Native American Heritage Month series, which is the American Indian origins of the Constitution and democracy. Okay, this video will not be too long. We're just gonna pretty much finish off from the last show, okay, which we did not get a chance to get all the way to the end of the presentation. So that's what we're going to do now. And let's see. We're going to start here. Okay. And so, picking up from the last point, which was the last paragraph here, it says France and the Haudenosaunee concluded a treaty of peace in 1653, but war resumed in 1658, marking the beginning of a century during which the Haudenosaunee balanced their own interests in the context of the rivalry between England and France. The war was costly to New France, in and in 1665, a military buildup in New France brought the two sides to negotiations and another treaty. Within months of the treaty, France launched an invasion into Mohawk territory. One of the results of this exchange was that a Mohawk village was coerced into accepting French Jesuit missionaries. This village would eventually move under French occupation to the St. Lawrence Valley, where its people would become known as the French or Caughnawaga Nation, Iroquois. I'm sorry, I skipped the line. I'm sorry. This village would eventually move under the French protection to the St. Lawrence Valley, where its people would become known as the French or Caughnawaga Iroquois. They would eventually find their home in the oldest and largest Indian town established by Europeans, Kanwake, Quebec. But they would be estranged from the Confederacy from that time. One of the first actions of the English after expelling the Dutch from the colony of New York was the establishment of formal relations with the Haudenosaunee in the form of a treaty with the Mohawks and Senecas in 1664. There are treaties of peace between the Haudenosaunee and other colonies during this period, with Massachusetts and Connecticut in 1677, with Maryland and Virginia in 1677, and another with Virginia in 1679. Although they were arguably outnumbered and potentially surrounded by powerful enemies, the Haudenosaunee managed to sustain a measure of political and commercial hegemony among their Indian neighbors through the skillful and energetic use of diplomacy. Through a complex web of agreements and alliances, they played a principal role in control of trade routes and in access to large but sparsely populated hunting territories shared by a number of Indian nations. Their strategic location, their their strategic location, they were adjacent to both the French and English colonies, was a major factor that enabled them to exercise influence over international affairs far in excess of that afforded by either their numbers or their military prowess. France continued to view the Haudenosaunee as a threat to their ambitions for economic hegemony over the Indian nations and lands around the Great Lakes and into the Ohio Valley. French efforts to establish economic and military alliances with the Illinois nation led to tensions between France and the Haudenosaunee after the latter attacked the Illinois in 1680. In early 1684, Seneca warriors seized a French arms shipment and also attacked a French outpost on the Illinois River. New France's governor, Labarre, sought and received permission to go to war. In July, he set off with an army that was soon devastated by sickness and was forced to abandon plans for attack. The next year, France sent the Marquis de Denonville, Marquis de Denonville, to accomplish the task of forcing the Haudenosaunee into submission. He launched an attack in the summer of 1687, during which French armies and their Indian allies invaded the Seneca country, while most of the able-bodied Seneca men were pursuing military action against Indians in the Mississippi watershed, and the Seneca towns were burned. But the French were forced to withdraw, and there was no decisive battle. 2 years later, Haudenosaunee forces attacked the French at Lachine on the St. Lawrence River and laid siege to nearby Montreal. Hostilities between the Haudenosaunee and France were to continue independent of France's struggle with England during the War of the League of Augsburg, which ended in 1697, until a peace treaty ending the war was signed in 1701. From that time until France was expelled from North America in 1763, the Haudenosaunee maintained a position of neutrality in the wars between France and England, although they maintained closer cultural and economic relations with England. Following the 7 Years' War, some Senecas joined Pontiac's campaign to drive English settlers out of the Ohio region, but Sir William Johnson was successful in keeping the Seneca Nation as in keeping the Seneca Nation as a whole and the rest of the Haudenosaunee from joining Pontiac's forces. During the American Revolution, the Grand Council of the Haudenosaunee met and formally declared neutrality in the war between Britain and the American colonists. However, religious loyalties had invaded the Haudenosaunee communities and continued to work to their disadvantage. In 1776, many of the Mohawks in the Mohawk Valley were members of the Church of England, while a number of Oneida warriors were converts to the Bostonian Puritanism of the Reverend Samuel Kirkland. Loyalties divided communities and families along these lines. At the same time, disaster struck Onondaga in 1777 in the form of a plague that rendered the Onondagas unable to host Confederacy meetings at a critical moment in the war. In the absence of Confederacy advice, significant numbers of Iroquois warriors joined the war effort in support of Britain. In retaliation, American forces invaded Confederacy lands in 1779, burning crops and villages and scattering the population. All in all, the American Revolution was a disaster for the Haudenosaunee. Following the war, treaties were signed that transferred ever larger areas of Haudenosaunee territory into the hands of New York State and a series of land speculators. Not even the Oneidas and Tuscaroras, who had supported the American Revolution, were spared. They lost most of their land in what are generally regarded as coercive or fraudulent treaties. Joseph Brant, the Mohawk war chief, most responsible for persuading the warriors to support the British, negotiated lands in Canada, most notably a territory along the Grand River, in reparation for those lost in New York. In 1784, following the treaty that ended the war, many of the Haudenosaunee migrated there. In the 19th century, the Iroquois Confederacy continued as both a political alliance and a cultural entity. In 1799, the Seneca prophet Handsome Lake began his mission to restore the traditional practices of the Haudenosaunee and to lay the foundation of the modern Iroquois traditional religion. He also restored the Confederacy Council Fire to Onondaga in central New York State. Shortly thereafter, the nations on the Grand River, unable to travel the great distance to Onondaga to conduct their governance, kindled a Confederacy fire at their home in Canada. Since that time, the Confederacy has conducted grand councils in both longhouses. Although the two councils unite and act as one whenever business must be conducted that affects them both, the Grand River Council is the primary political organization in negotiations with Canada and its political subdivisions, while the Grand Council at Onondaga is the primary negotiator with the United States and its subdivisions. Although there have been some changes, the chiefs of the Confederacy continue to meet in council and to host gatherings at which the great law is recited, both at Grand River and at Onondaga. The political culture of the Haudenosaunee, now some 5 or more centuries old, continues to function to this day with a resilience that has enabled their continued existence as a distinct people. Okay. And let's see. Okay, so some more background information. The Haudenosaunee flag represents the original 5 nations of the Iroquois Confederacy that were united by the peacemaker. The tree symbol in the center represents an eastern white pine, the needles of which are clustered in groups of 5. The flag is based on the Hiawatha wampum belt, created from purple and white wampum beads centuries ago to symbolize the union forged when the former enemies buried their weapons under the great tree of peace. The eagle, symbolizing the Iroquois Confederacy, held 6 arrows, one for each of the 6 nations. The eagle on the American seal holds 13 arrows, one for each of the 13 original states. So you can see where they got the concept from. From the US government's official booklet on the Great Seal, describing the lengthy search for a suitable design, the Congress still was not satisfied. On June 13th, 1782, it presented the collected work and recommendations of the 3 committees to Charles Thomson, Secretary of Congress. Thomson was not an artist, but he was a practical man with the ability to get things done. He selected the best features of all the previous designs, assigning prominence to the eagle. Feeling that the new nation symbol should be strictly American, however, Thomson replaced Barton's crested imperial eagle with the Native American bald eagle, wings extending downward as though in flight. He placed in the left talon a bundle of arrows and in the right an olive branch. Providence. Note the connection between the seal's design and Thomson's deep familiarity with Indian culture. Most Indian tribes hold the eagle sacred. The bird was chosen by the Haudenosaunee to fly above the tree of peace. The eagle's sharp eyes can see afar to guard against anything that may approach the tree of peace with evil intent. The piercing scream of the eagle warns the people when the Confederacy is threatened. The symbolism of the eagle means that the Haudenosaunee government should be protective of its people and be watchful for anything that might harm the Confederacy. The cluster of arrows is another symbol of unity. The peacemaker, a Huron man by the name of Daganoweda, who we talked about early in the previous videos, who was considered to be the founder of the Confederacy, used the symbol of bound arrows to point out the importance of unity. The peacemaker took 1 arrow and easily broke it. He then took 2 arrows. With a little more effort, he broke them. 3, then 4 arrows were clustered and broken. But when 5 arrows were bound together, he could not break them. The cluster of arrows then symbolizes the strength that results from the joining together of several nations. In 1754, Franklin met with colonial and Iroquois leaders to discuss how the colonies might govern themselves. It was called the Albany Congress. Hendrick, a Mohawk chief, showed them how the Iroquois Confederacy worked. To illustrate the power of unity, Mr. Tarbell says, Hendrick used the example of the Iroquois. To illustrate the power of unity, Mr. Tarbell says Hendrick used the example the Iroquois used when their nations came together. He held up one arrow and broke it, then held up 5 arrows bound together and showed how they could not be broken. The next day, Tarbell notes Franklin presented a plan for a new American government designed to wield the individual colonies into a unified whole. It was called the Albany Plan of Union, and it included many features of Iroquois law. An Indian symbol on the dollar bill. The founding fathers didn't adopt as much of the Iroquois model as Franklin had advocated. Some scholars dismiss the idea that the Iroquois government had any influence on the shape of the United States government today. But then, why were Iroquois leaders invited to hear debates about the Declaration of Independence? Tarbell asks. The native delegation slept in Philadelphia's Independence Hall in a room just above the one in which the debates took place. To this day, Iroquois law remains unchanged. It continues to guide the Grand Council of the People of the Longhouse and has influenced nations outside of the Iroquois Confederacy as well. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. I just wanted to finish up that presentation. And even though some may try to debate the American Indian influence on the Constitution and democracy, there is no doubt. You just have to be in outright denial and a liar to debate all of those similarities. Okay. It'd be different if there were just a few similarities. But if 99%, let's be a little more generous, say if between 95 and 98% of it is similar, then, you know, there is no denial. Okay. You can't deny it. Okay. So, with that being said, we can pretty much end this presentation here. And for those who are generous enough to leave a donation, I'm going to put in the chat where you can do so. Give me 1 second. Let me see. I guess because this is not a live, it can't be done, but I will read it off to you. So if you want to leave a donation via PayPal, it's akiralove07@gmail.com. That's A as in apple, K as in kite, I as in igloo, R as in red, A as in apple, L as in leopard, O as in Oscar, V as in very, E as in elephant, 07@gmail.com. That's AKIRALOVE KAZ07@gmail.com. And if you want to leave a donation via Cash App, that's the $ K as in kite, L as in Larry, O as in Oscar, V as in vary or vine, E as in elephant, 83, the number 83. So that's $KLOVE 83, the number 83. Okay. And yeah, that's pretty much it. All right. So we'll sign out now. And we'll say until the next time. Da da da, gaha e.